Before this move, corporations could pull billions of liters of Canada's cleanest fresh water for a handful of dollars per million liters, sometimes for nothing at all. Then they bottled it, shipped it, and sold it back to consumers for a couple dollars a bottle. Canada just signaled that era is finished. And the detail investors can't ignore is who's paying attention. Warren Buffett, who's tied to Coca-Cola in a way almost no investor is, has warned for months that tariff fights boomerang. When a trade war pushes a country to weaponize resource pricing, the damage doesn't land on politicians first. It lands on balance sheets. This is the story of how Canada decided its fresh water, about 1/5 of the world's supply, will no longer be extracted at a giveaway price. How that exposed decades of corporate extraction dressed up as business. How it connects to the US-Canada trade conflict, and why the price of bottled water, soda, sports drinks, and juice is about to move. This is the story of how Canada decided its fresh water, about 1/5 of the world's supply, will no longer be extracted at a giveaway price. How that exposed decades of corporate extraction dressed up as business. How it connects to the US-Canada trade conflict, and why the price of bottled water, soda, sports drinks, and juice is about to move. Subscribe for updates, because what Canada just did with water will echo far longer than any headline tariff. Let me start with what Canada actually did, because the policy details are what crashed the market. Mark Carney unveiled a broad federal water extraction levy on all corporations extracting Canadian freshwater for commercial purposes. The tax pushes costs sharply higher from the old provincial fee schedules, and once you hear what those previous rates were, you'll understand why this was so overdue. Ontario used to charge $3.71 for a million L of water, not 1,000 L, a million L. In 2017, after years of public pressure, they raised it to $53 per million Del, still less than the cost of a single case of the bottled water being produced. British Columbia charged $2.25 per million liters, and before 2016, they charged nothing. Zero. Nestlé extracted 265 million L of water per year from a well in Hope, British Columbia, and paid the provincial government absolutely nothing for it. The new federal framework treats fresh water as what it is, a strategic national resource, and prices it accordingly. Ontario used to charge less for a million liters than you pay for a single bottle at a gas station. That era is over. Markets reacted instantly and violently. PepsiCo dropped 15%, not because the tax is going to bankrupt the company. PepsiCo brings in $94 billion in annual revenue, and a water tax on Canadian operations is manageable on its own. It dropped 15% because investors suddenly realized that the cheapest input in the entire beverage supply chain, water, has been priced at essentially zero for decades, and that era just ended. The 15% drop isn't the cost of the tax. It's the market repricing what water is actually worth. Coca-Cola dipped but recovered partially, trading near all-time highs around $79 a share. Analysts noted its global diversification as a buffer, but Coca-Cola announced a strategic reassessment of its Canadian operations. PepsiCo warned investors of a meaningful impact on North American margins. The beverage industry lobby called the tax unprecedented and economically destructive. Carney's response to the corporate backlash was cutting. He pointed out that Nestlé had extracted 638 million LERs from a single well in Ontario in 1 year, while nearby Indigenous communities on Six Nations territory didn't have clean drinking water. When a corporation tells you that paying a fair price for water is economically destructive, what they're really telling you is that their business model relies on getting the most valuable resource on Earth for free. And that business model just died. The numbers underneath this story are staggering. Canada holds roughly 20% of the world's freshwater reserves. The Great Lakes alone contain 21% of the world's surface freshwater shared with the United States, governed by the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909. The global bottled water market is worth $350 billion. And the United Nations has projected global freshwater demand will outstrip supply by 40% within the coming decades. Canada isn't taxing a mere commodity. Canada is pricing a strategic national asset. And the corporations that have been extracting that asset for pennies just discovered what happens when a country decides its resources belong to its people, not to shareholders. But to understand why this tax is so cutting, not just for the corporations, but for the arguments they've been making for decades, you need to see what they were actually paying. British Columbia charged nothing for groundwater extraction until 2016. Nothing. Nestlé's water bottling plant in Hope, BC, extracted 265 million liters per year from Coco Lake. A district well driller described the regulatory environment as the regulatory Wild West. No permits, no reporting, no tracking, no nothing. You could drill a well on your property and pump it at 100 gallons a minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and waste every drop. No regulation. When the province finally imposed a fee in 2016, after years of community pressure, it was $2.25 per million liters. Ontario was marginally better, charging $3.71 per million DL until 2017 when they raised it to $503. Still less than what you'd pay for 2 bottles of the water being extracted, and even at the higher rate, the water cost per bottle, 500 milliliters of product, works out to a fraction of a cent. The markup is not a few 100%. It's not a few 1,000%. It's tens of millions of percent. The profit margin on bottled water isn't a business story. It's an extraction story. The corporations aren't selling water. They're selling the fact that governments let them take it for free. The symbol for this extraction was Nestle Waters Canada. They operated for decades in Aberfoyle, Ontario, and Hope, British Columbia, extracting billions of liters. 638 million LERs from one well in 2023, 672 million the year before. Their permit allowed twice the actual extraction volume. They operated on expired permits while Ontario scrambled to update its regulations. And in 2015, Nestle outbid the township of Centre Wellington for a well that the community wanted for its own drinking water. A multinational Swiss corporation outbid a Canadian town for access to its own groundwater. Meanwhile, the Six Nations of the Grand River, Canada's largest First Nation, located on the same traditional lands, had 11,000 residents, 85% of their population, without safe tap water. A multinational corporation extracted water from indigenous land where 11,000 people didn't have clean drinking water, paid less than $4 per million liters, bottled it in single-use plastic, and sold it back to Canadians for $2 a bottle for 20 years. In 2005, Nestle's former CEO, Peter Brabeck, was recorded saying that water should not be considered a human right and should instead be treated as a foodstuff commodity. That video leaked in 2013 and spread everywhere. The CEO of the world's largest water company said water shouldn't be a human right, and his company was paying $3 for 1 million liters of it. After nearly 2 decades of community resistance from Wellington water watchers, the Council of Canadians, First Nations groups, and thousands of ordinary Canadians, Nestle sold its Canadian operations to a private equity firm called Blue Triton in 2021. New name, same play. Blue Triton finally announced the closure of the Aberfoyle plant in late 2024, pushed out not by regulators, but by 18 years of relentless public pressure. And this isn't just a Canadian problem. In Michigan, Nestle paid $200 per year for a permit to extract over 1 million liters per day from the Great Lakes watershed. In the same state where Flint's water crisis became a national scandal, where residents drank lead-poisoned water for years while state officials denied the problem, a Michigan lawmaker proposed charging Nestle $20 million a year for the extraction. The proposal went nowhere. In California, Nestle extracted water on expired permits during the worst drought in the state's recorded history. While residents were fined for watering their lawns and communities faced mandatory rationing, a multinational corporation pumped water from national forest land on permits that hadn't been renewed in decades. In Pakistan, Nigeria, and Ethiopia, communities are losing access to groundwater as corporations extracted for commercial sale. Corporations have been extracting fresh water from communities around the world for essentially nothing, bottling it in plastic that will outlast every person alive today, and selling it at markups that would make a drug dealer blush. Canada just drew a line, and the timing of this tax isn't an accident. It's directly connected to the trade war. Trump imposed 35% tariffs on Canadian goods. Canada retaliated with tariffs of its own. But here's what makes the water tax fundamentally different from every other weapon in this trade war. Tariffs are mostly symmetrical. They hurt both sides roughly equally. A car park gets taxed crossing the border in both directions, but water is an asymmetric weapon. Canada has 20% of the world's fresh water. The Great Lakes hold 21% of the world's surface fresh water. American beverage corporations have extraction operations throughout Canada, and the United States can't replace Canadian freshwater with freshwater from anywhere else because there isn't anywhere else with that volume and that quality. Trump brought tariffs, Canada brought water, and water is the one resource you literally can't replace, cannot manufacture, and cannot live without. The water tax fits perfectly into Carney's broader strategy, a strategy that has been methodical and sequenced and devastatingly effective. In January, he signed the China deal and declared a rupture at Davos. In February, he rejected the bridge seizure, watched the House vote 219 to 211 to repeal Trump's tariffs, and dispatched his trade minister to Asia to pursue $300 billion in non-U.S. export growth. Now, the water tax, each move is designed to reduce American leverage and increase Canada's economic independence before the USMCA review in July. The scheduled review of the trade agreement Trump himself negotiated, which he has since described as irrelevant. 80% of goods traded between the two countries are protected under that agreement. The water tax gives Canada yet another source of leverage heading into the review. You want Canadian water priced at the old rates? Let's talk about tariffs first. Carney isn't playing this like a politician. He's playing it like a central banker. Every move is designed to revalue Canada's strategic assets, its trade relationships, its geographic position, its natural resources, and reduce the discount that the United States has been getting for decades. The trade war escalation tells the full story. February 25% tariffs justified by fentanyl that less than 1% of came from Canada. Carney elected in April. Each concession met with escalation, 35% tariffs. Talks terminated over a $75,000 Ontario ad. Quoting Reagan, the bridge threat, the 51st state rhetoric USMCA called irrelevant. Canada's response escalated from tariff retaliation to trade diversification to the China deal to the Davos Declaration, and now to resource sovereignty. The water tax is the latest escalation in a sequence that Trump started and cannot control, and at every stage Trump's weapons have backfired while Canada's have hit their target. And here's the irony that should keep Trump's advisors awake at night. He wanted to use economic force to absorb Canada. He treated Canadian resources, water, oil, minerals, timber, as if they already belonged to America. The water tax is Canada's definitive response. These resources are ours, and you will pay market rate for them. Trump talked about making Canada the 51st state. 91% of Canadians responded by demanding less dependence on the United States. A nationwide boycott slashed American tourism revenue. Canadian travel to the U.S. dropped 40%. Snowbirds sold their Florida properties. And now Canada's response was to remind him that the 51st state controls 20% of the world's fresh water, and the price just went up. And this shift, nations asserting sovereignty over their resources as an economic weapon, isn't limited to Canada. It's part of a global pattern that is fundamentally reshaping how power works. What Canada just did with water is part of something much bigger than the trade war. Nations around the world are waking up to the same realization. The resources underneath their feet and flowing through their rivers are worth more than what foreign corporations have been paying for them. And that realization is reshaping the global economy. We've watched the domestic pattern play out for over a year now. Mike Pence gave total loyalty and nearly died for refusing one ask. Bill Barr bent the Justice Department further than any attorney general in modern history and was branded a traitor for one refusal. 3 Supreme Court justices appointed by Trump ruled independently and were accused of betrayal. The Senate voted 61-39 to block emergency powers. Every demand for submission eventually met resistance, and every resistance was punished. The international pattern is identical. The EU complied with the Turnberry deal. $750 billion in energy commitments that analysts called impossible. And within months, Trump was threatening 35% tariffs because compliance wasn't fast enough. South Korea signed a deal and got tariffs raised. The UK signed a framework and got Greenland threats. But Canada's escalation ladder is the one that tells the real story. First tariff retaliation symmetrical, both sides hurt, then trade diversification, strategic, reducing dependency, then the China deal, geopolitical, creating alternative partnerships, then the Davos speech, ideological, rallying middle powers. Then the water tax existential, because each stage of Canada's response has been more powerful than the last. Tariffs were symmetrical. They hurt both sides equally. Trade diversification was strategic. It reduced U.S. leverage. The China deal was geopolitical. It gave Canada an alternative partner. But the water tax is something different entirely. It's existential because you can find another trading partner. You can find another source of oil. You can find another supplier for auto parts. You cannot find another source of fresh water. Chile nationalized its lithium reserves in 2023, asserting sovereign control over the mineral essential for every electric vehicle battery on Earth. Indonesia banned nickel ore exports to force foreign companies to invest in domestic processing instead of extracting raw material and shipping it elsewhere. The Democratic Republic of Congo is renegotiating mining contracts for cobalt, the mineral that powers every smartphone, every laptop, and every EV battery in the world, demanding a larger sovereign share. And OPEC, the original resource sovereignty movement, proved 50 years ago that when you control a resource the world depends on, you control the conversation. Water is the new oil. Oil powered the 20th century. Water will define the 21st. And the countries that control the largest freshwater reserves, Canada, Brazil, Russia, are beginning to understand what OPEC understood in 1973. When you control a resource the world cannot live without, the world listens. Canada holds 20% of the world's fresh water. The Great Lakes alone contain 21% of the world's surface freshwater. That's not a trade asset. That's a civilizational one. And Trump treated it like a line item on a balance sheet he could renegotiate by posting threats on Truth Social. He said he would use economic force to absorb Canada. He treated Canadian water, Canadian oil, Canadian minerals, and Canadian timber as if they were already American. The water tax is Canada's response. These resources have a price, and you will pay it. Trump talked about using economic force to absorb Canada. Canada responded by putting a price on the one resource that no amount of economic force can replace. Water doesn't care about tariffs. Water doesn't care about IEPA declarations. Water doesn't care about Truth Social posts at 2 a.m. Water is the one thing every human being, every corporation, and every nation needs to survive. And Canada just reminded the world that 20% of it is theirs. Gold has surged past $5,500 an ounce. Central banks are shifting reserves away from U.S. Treasury bonds. But here's the thing about gold. Gold is optional. It's a store of value. You can live without it. Water is not optional. You cannot live without it. And the country that controls a fifth of the world's supply just decided it's done giving it away. And the person who understands the economics of this better than almost anyone alive, and who has 28 billion personal reasons to pay attention, is Warren Buffett. Let me tell you about Buffett's relationship with Coca-Cola, because it's what makes his response to this moment unlike anything else in the trade war. Buffett bought 400 million shares of Coca-Cola in 1988 for approximately $1.3 billion. Today, those shares are worth roughly $28 billion. Coca-Cola is Berkshire Hathaway's single largest stock holding. Buffett has said publicly repeatedly that he will never sell Coca-Cola. It is the definition of a forever hold, the investment he plans to own until the day he dies. And water is the primary ingredient in every single Coca-Cola product.